Oh, what's her name? We are going to look at a piece of property less than a mile from her house. So
you're going to get me to volunteer no matter what.
So she would come down over there with us. We have the Alliance landfill people, which she doesn't like to live in their backyard, but they have a building they're going to let us have for nothing. Rent free. Now
That's a good word.
it is a good word, but it's Halloween 04, so we don't know how many volunteers we're going to gain or how many volunteers we're going to lose. But what makes it nice is it's right off the turnpike and anybody come out of town will know how to get there. Okay, so let me introduce our speaker, our presenter, Jack's wife. I don't know what name she's going by, but she's Christine Schaefer. You want to take it around the back there, please? And you're doing Christine Schaefer Yarns. Christine Yarns. Christina Yarns. Schaefer Yarns. Somebody.
Christine for the first name, Yarns for the middle name, Schaefer for the last name.
But who's the lady you're going to do the herbs about?
Well,
Yourself?
I'm going to talk about my great-great-grandmother. We'll get it.
Okay, pardon me for screwing everything up. So, but we'll take a 10-minute break. They're going to cut the pizza, then we'll break after the pizza, and then you finish the rest of your program.
Okay, you're going to go in 10 minutes.
Yeah, less than 10, yes.
All right, we'll make it fast. I can be rapid. Okay, good evening, and welcome to the 18th
I really don't. I'm
century.
sorry. I don't know what.
My century. Gardeners are attracted today, as in the 18th century, to the planting and the study of herbs. Herb lore is the information that is passed down through the generations. When our ancestors came to the Americas, they brought many possessions with them. Some were books, some were seeds, some were plants. In the case of this particular family, they brought the herbals that had been passed down generation after generation through the family. I'd like to introduce you to the main person in this herb family. Her name is Mary Foster Yarns, and she was my great-great-great-grandmother. Her mother, Elizabeth, would tell her husband, John, it's young Mary that has the gift. And that's what they called it in the 18th century. They called it a gift. The ability to nurture, plant, heal, and the passion to do this. So this young child in the Foster family is the one that they will pass the herbal knowledge to. Because Mary's mother, Elizabeth, is also an herb lady. In tonight's program, I will use common names, common terms, and I'll call some of the herbs by 18th century names that are not familiar to us, but I will explain them. I will also talk about some Indian lore, mainly Seneca, because that's where this family would be. I'll also talk about several herbs that we consider obnoxious weeds. And I'll give you a hint. One of them, not me, spends a lot of money and a waste of time as far as I'm concerned, getting these yellow flowers out of their lawns. But to our 18th century ancestors, that was a survival plant. And they brought it here to the Americas. Dandelion isn't a native plant. It may seem like it is, but it isn't. We know what the season is. That's not very hard this time because the heat alone tells us that we're almost into summer. The butterflies are very active. Yellow swallowtails can be seen, white admirals, and birds are singing deep in the woods. If you are lucky enough, eastern bluebirds may be nesting in an old cavity tree. And of course, to an 18th century person, the days are getting longer. It means you can get more chores done. If you will, it's going to take some imagination. I want you to step back in time with me. And we're going to go to a rural, rustic log cabin in upstate New York. A name I want you to remember. We are in Oswego, New York. Remember September Oswego. That's important. Our time frame is 1750 to 1800. And as we look into this rustic log cabin, we see that our herb lady is getting up. Any herb lady worth her salt is up before dawn. You do not work in your herb gardens in any time frame in the afternoon. You want to collect those herbs in the morning just as the dew is on them, because they're at their strongest. And if you want them to dry and be usable, you certainly don't want a plant that is sort of wind over because of the hot sun. And many herbs do not like heat. We find that her husband is also up, and he has filled a water cauldron. She has thrown some corn husks on that fire. They have an open hearth fireplace. And she is going to make the first beverages of the day to go with the first meal of the day. The first thing she's going to do is she is going to go over to her most prized possession, and that is the herb chest. It may have been made by her father, but whatever the circumstances, in every generation where there was an herb lady, they gave them an herb chest as their wedding gift. I recently did a program where I was asked, what was the herb chest made out of? What kind of wood? Well, these people came from up in Rhode Island and New England states, so I'm just going to say it was probably a hardwood of some kind. It would be 3 feet high, 2 feet across, and 3 to 4 feet deep. When you open the herb chest, and it would have a lid, the top part would contain some of the oddest assortment of bottles you've ever seen. And those are her tinctures. They used grain alcohol internally and externally. Some of the bottles would have an herb soaking in them, but that's not what she's after this morning. The fire's come up enough, the water's hot, and she can make herself a really good cup of tea. After all, she's English. And she will go to her tea chest, second drawer, and she will take out this morning sage. She's going to make herself a cup of sage tea. And the reason for that is there's a mystical herbal belief that sage tea brings longevity. So they drank a great deal of sage tea. I can't dispute it, I can't prove it, except for the fact in the genealogy of this family, which I traced back to 1640, they lived to be 95, 98, and a few of them made it over 100. So I don't know if they were drinking the whiskey or the sage tea or the combination of both. If you notice and you look into the open hearth, there's other pots and they're cooking. Her husband, who by trade is a dowser. A dowser in the kindest terms in the 18th century is a water witch. He can find water. But he also has the gift of blacksmithing. So he has hand-forged different types of bands for her so that she can be cooking herbs at different levels. Because this herb lady needs to cook these herbs. To make a salve, she would combine it with beeswax and lard. And that's what an 18th century salve would be. So she's always making and preparing her herbs. She has a very short window to be able to collect, dry, and make what she needs. Because if she runs out in the middle of the winter, say she has one of her concoctions made and you come to her, if you're a member of her church, oh, I ran out. She can't go anywhere to get it. There's no local stores, there's no nothing. So they prepared to have an 8-month supply of herbs, that they would still have enough to get them through the harshness of winter and into the spring. I think Joe wants
Yeah, we're ready. Yeah.
Okay, so that's where we are. We're cooking those herbs, and I'll pick it up after that.
Okay, one more thing. Good thing I have enough people around here telling me what to do. We have a cookbook program. Faye Robbins is in charge of this. Everybody submit their recipes. My wife gave me 4 or 5 tonight, and we're going to submit them into the cookbook, and we're going to publish our own cookbook as a fundraiser and also as a fun thing. So if you have 3 or 4 recipes, please submit them to Faye Robbins or leave them here, and we'll see if she gets them.
One of the things that she would do for the first meal of the day, and she has to make her husband a different beverage. 18th century men did not drink tea in the morning. They drank a coffee-like beverage. And that's from the root of the chicory and our old friend the dandelion. So when you combine them, you have to think of the fact that this 18th century woman was giving her husband a coffee-like drink that contained a one-a-day vitamin at the same time. Chicory, I'm sorry to say, is disappearing. It's a really nondescript plant, but it has a blue flower on it, very much the same color of my English bodice. And it grows along roadsides and at the end of fields, and we just try to get rid of it as much as we can. So those are the 2 roots that she would combine to give him a coffee-like drink, to which he would add lots of maple sugar and just a little pinch of whiskey, depending on whatever he was drinking. She would make for them, for the first meal of the day, sojourner cakes. Sojourner cakes are made on a hoe pan. It's a special pan like all open hearth cooking pans are. It is a very small frying pan that has the spider legs. Remember, she has to put it over the coals. So she would make them. Sojourner cakes are what would later be known in the 19th century as Johnny cakes. The recipe is basically the same. The Sojourner name comes from out of Canada and was very popular in upstate New York and northern Pennsylvania in my time frame of the 18th century. Now her husband might have 4, 5, 6 of these, because the typical diet of an 18th century adult was 3,000 to 4,000 calories a day. I guarantee you they did not count the fat, they didn't care about carbs, they just cared about good food. And they had their meals in the order of a number. First meal a day, second meal a day, third meal a day. That's how they ate. So they ate a great deal of food, but they worked really hard. Since they've had their first meal of the day, both parents are going to head out. Her husband, Dewar, and that's his first name, D-U-E-R, is going to go and check the field closest to the cabin. Because in early spring, he planted a crop there for his wife. It's called the Connecticut Field Pumpkin. And it's not that pumpkin that we think of as Halloween. It's sort of a flat pumpkin with a long neck. And this particular pumpkin can be traced back through the Heritage Seed Exchange to 1774 and the Seneca Indians. The reason that she wants that crop so close to the log cabin is she is going to harvest that when she can. And she will make pumpkin bread, pumpkin pudding, and the main staple of the winter, pumpkin soup. If you read old cookbooks like I do, 18th century, you will see that their pumpkin soup was what we do to vegetable soup. They just put everything in it, and the base was the pumpkin. But the important thing for the herb lady is the fact that she is going to be making pumpkin juice. They drank for a winter cure-all, pumpkin juice, maple sugar. You have to remember, these are religious Baptists combined with whiskey, a grain alcohol. If you have a colicky baby, she would make up for you a little mixture, hopefully not so much whiskey, and she would give that to you so that you could do something with the colicky baby. Because an herb lady in her church was revered. Doctors were maybe 30, 40, 50 miles away. During this time period, there are not many medical men. Maybe the closest thing you have is the minister that comes the circuit riding minister who rides 200-300 miles a year, and he might pick up some knowledge. And so you had to rely on this woman with her herbal cures. She's not going to go out and collect today. She's going to work in her herb garden. In the 18th century, she would collect 70 to 80% of her herbs. They were there for the taking. But she also had 3 gardens that she maintained. And our first garden is the pot garden. Now, when I say that, and there's a lot of age difference in generations, I notice a twinkle in a lot of eyes. Aha, I'm getting some signals from over in that direction. Okay, so this is 18th century, folks. And these may be Baptists, and they may be drinking a lot of whiskey for medical purposes only. The big thing is her pot garden is the herbs that would go in her cooking pot. And that's what it would be called. Instead of calling it a seasonal garden or whatever, they called it a pot garden. She would have her friend parsley. She would have spearmint. They planted something that they called a pot marigold, which they ate the entire plant. They also freshened up stews that had been cooking and cooking and cooking. They would add this plant to it. They brought with them seeds from England of the white cucumber. So they would have those also. And now, we're going to see how much you know about herbs. This is a test. She would have planted in her pot garden listen to the words, St. Joseph's wort. For a moment, I'll step aside and I'll be a Seneca Indian, and I'll call it Wild Mountain Mint. But what do we call it? It's St. Joseph's, not St. John. St. Joseph's wort. Sweet basil.
Yeah?
Yes.
I never heard of it called St. Joseph's. Never.
That's the term that they would use, and you'd find in herbals of the 18th century that it's St. Joseph's wort. If you look in the Indian lore type of books, you'll find that the Seneca Indians and most of the Indians that we would have had in this area and northern Indians, they called it Wild Mountain Mint because it grew wild. She would have dill in her pot garden. They used dill as a seasoning a great deal. The pot garden was always on a southern slope for drainage. They got it as close to the cabin as they could, mainly because if you had to go somewhere, or say that circuit riding minister showed up and you had breath that was 3-4 days old, you went over, took a sprig of mint, chewed on the mint, and you were fine. Your breath freshener instantly. She would have garlic chives, and of course, she would have sage. This I take from my great, I always have to count them out with my foot like a horse. My great-great-grandmother's herbals. This would be called the sick garden. We would say it's her medical garden. In the sick garden, she's going to have our friend basil again. Basil was used to relieve headaches. They also dried it. They ground it down. And they stuffed it up into the nose to relieve congestion. They also would make a thick tea out of it for you to drink for 3 days. In 18th century herbals, you'll find the numbers 3 and 7 seem to be their cures for what worked and what didn't. And if it didn't work and the herb lady never heard from you again, well, maybe that was an herb you shouldn't use anymore. That's how they learned what to use and what not to use. But say you have a really stubborn headache and you come back and you say to her, I still got a headache. I got this stuff up my nose, I'm drinking this concoction, and nothing has worked in 3 days. She would go to the native willow tree, which is the black willow. She will take branches and she will weave you a headache ring. It will fit your head, and you wear it for 7 days. They learned this from the Indians. I don't know what type of Indian, but that's what they did. She would then take the bark off of this willow, which she has dried. This is in her herb chest. She will put it with boiling water, and she will make a thick paste, and you get to drink that. My theory is that cured your headache alone, because who wanted to do that for 7 days? If you came to her and you said, I had a case of the stones, she would give you parsley. This parsley is a diuretic, which most of us, when we're served in a fine restaurant, push off. But it is a diuretic, and it would help with kidney stones. One of the most interesting plants in any century is tansy. Now, if we have been paying attention, I said they garden with raised bed gardens, and they planted the tansy around the raised bed. They planted it around the cabin. But the most important thing they did was in the spring, and this is where herb lore comes in, and they brought this with them. You can trace this all the way back to the 14th century. In the spring, they took the little sprouts, and I mean the snow isn't all off yet. They took those little sprouts of tansy, they took eggs, they took butter, they took cheese, and they made what they called a tansy cake. I call that an omelet, but they called it a tansy cake. And you ate this, and it purified your system of all the internal parasites that you had. Because some of our ancestors ate food that was questionable. But this same plant, when it's grown, as it is right now, and it looks very much like ferns, and you snip a piece off, you crush it in your hand, it has a very thick, oily response, and you rub it all over yourself. Mosquitoes won't bite you. No biting bugs will bother you. You plant it around foundations. It keeps away rats, mice, rodents don't like that oil on them, so it keeps them away. So the ancestors planted the tansy. So here is an herb that in the 18th century, in the spring, they made into this tansy cake, and they ate it. My interpretation of this is an omelet with a raid can in it, because you're eating an herb that repels insects, it repels rodents, and they ate. Obviously, they were much tougher than what we are. Sage they would use for headaches. They would make a sage rinse for their infected gums, and we all know in the 18th century they did not have the best of teeth. They also had another plant which was very, very important. It was the mainstay of every herb lady's garden, and that's the nosebleed plant. Now that's the 18th century term for it. The nosebleed plant is white yarrow. Now we go and we buy yarrow, and it's yellow or it's pink, and it gets big heads on it. The wild yarrow only flowers to the size of a quarter, but it is white and it looks very much the same as the cultivated plant. They would dry that, they would grind it down, and they could stop nosebleeds. They packed it up in the nose. And if you had an open wound, they would pack it in the open wound, and then they would put some sage leaves on top, and on top of that, they would put what they called woolly ears. Woolly ears are what we call lamb's ears, and that would protect the wound. One of the things that she would have collected in the spring is Canada lily. That's the wild lily in the valley. It's a very nondescript flower. It has one little leaf, one tiny little flower on it. It really doesn't look like the cultivated lily of the valley, but she would use that dried to make a tea for nerves. And then we come to the history lesson. And we're going to see how good you are at your history. I'm going to talk about an herb in a very special way. But first, we'll see if Tom gets this one. Are you listening, Tom? 1773. Oh, we all failed History 101, huh? 1773. We had a party. We weren't invited.
See?
Right. And we showed England what we thought of their tariffs. And really, the Boston Tea Party was not about the price of tea. It was about the quality. The tea came from China. Until it got to England and finally made it to us, it wasn't a very good tea. It was in solid, hard brick blocks. You had something called a penny knife. You shaved this off and you put it in the cup and you hope you got something. So we were complaining about the price and the quality of what we were drinking. But in upstate New York, where this family is located, they didn't have to worry about that. They'd never bought any of that tea. Because in upstate New York and in northern Pennsylvania, which is very hard to find now, the wild bee balm grew. Many people see bee balm and think it's a cardinal flower. It is not. Bee balm is a mint. We know it when we go to buy plants. Or if you go where there's herbs sold, Monarda will be listed, bergamot, it's the same plant. Except the wild is almost as Christmas red as any color that you can see. It's literally disappeared from our landscape. It's hard to grow through blacktop. And so we've eradicated a lot of the areas where it did grow. But our ancestors were making the tea from the bee balm, only they called it, remember I told you to remember this name? They called it Oswego tea because they had learned that from the Indians. The Indians have been drinking this as a tea for many, many years. When you go to buy bergamot or you go to buy Monarda, if it even has a tag in it that says it will be crimson red, what you get is something that's sort of pinkish or it has a purplish red color to it. The wildflower is as red can be. Think of a cardinal bird, and that's what it looks like. I was saying before, in May, my bee balm was, maybe this high. With all this heat, humidity, my plants are basically this high. They haven't flowered yet. So they're showing a lot of leaves, which is good for an herb person because I will now start collecting and drying. And I still dry all my herbs the natural way. I don't use microwaves or any of the new ideas. I tie them up with a baling twine. I have them in the back of my garage where there's a lot of air and they dry natural. And yeah, I have never had any luck with the ones that they do in the microwave. Eventually, to me, they get mildewy, so I don't really bother with them. She would also have in her sick garden her arsenal of teas. Besides the bergamot, which is another one of those herb lores that they believe is healthy. She'd have spearmint. She'd plant the peppermint where, as my great-great-grandmother would say, his feet got wet. Because peppermint likes to be in wet soil. And the reason is, it's a combination of spearmint and the English water mint from England. It's a hybrid. So if you put spearmint and you put peppermint in the same general area, if it's a dry soil, spearmint will survive and the peppermint won't. Because it don't want to be in a swamp, but it likes the wet soil. She would also have chamomile. She would have catmint. Not catnip. Catmint. Catmint is, and I forgot to grab some out of my yard tonight, is a very delicate little flower. It's bluish in color and the leaves are very small. The wild catnip is a totally different flower. It has a very thick stem and it has almost an arrow type of leaves and it grows maybe about this high. And that's the wild catnip. That's the stuff your cats like, and it is also a laxative. Catmint is for your nerves. So if you mix them up, you're going to spend a lot of time checking out your bathroom and your nerves aren't going to be very good. The other plant that she would have is Joe Pye. Now Joe Pye, you can still see in this area in many, many places. It grows along the creek areas. It's very tall, and it gets a very huge pinkish flower on it with lots of little spikes. Many books list it as Joe Pye weed. But Joe Pye was named after an Indian medicine man. I have no idea what tribe he belonged to, and no one else seems to know either. But he claimed, and apparently it's documented, that he could make a tea out of this Joe Pye that would be for gallstones, urinary bladder infections, and rheumatism. And during an outbreak of scarlet fever, he was supposed to have saved many people by making them this concoction from Joe Pye. And so the plant was named after him. That could be what's known as an Indian lore, but it comes up in every book that you look at. She would have evening primrose. We would call that lemon drops. And when we buy it, it has a big yellow flower on it. But she would have what's known as evening primrose. And that would be for her nerves. They would use that for the nerves. So they used a lot of teas as some of their cures. Now her third garden always brings groans from the non-cat people. She would have a garden that they just basically called their mouser garden. And that was to protect the rest of her plants, to protect the cabin. She didn't need rodents in there eating her candles. If rodents eat all your candles, it's going to be a very dark winter because you will have no time to make new ones. Or the soap, or even ruining her food. So she would attract as many cats as she could, and she would plant a special garden for them. Usually was in between the two others. In this particular thing, she would put the wildcat nip, and she would have her husband put flat stones. The flat stones would heat up, and that'll attract the cats because they will lay there in the heat. Now, if you have English ancestors or you have French ancestors, you're the cause of the cats being here. That's the two groups that brought the cats to America. If you have computers, and you know how to Google, get on there and type in the phrase, how did cats come to America? It will kick it up. They've got their own website. Check it out. I sat there in front of the monitor going, I don't believe this. They have their own website, tells exactly how they got here, and that the French and the English are the ones that brought them. Now, I don't know if we can blame the French and the English for the dandelion, too. I mean, we could group this together. One of the things that was very important would be that in the fall, you hung your three sisters. And this was learned from the Indians. The Indians believed that there were certain things you had to do to appease the different gods. And so in the fall, you would hang your three sisters. And I'm not going to let everybody sit in suspense. The three sisters happen to be corn, bean, and squash. This gave you a food source, but you saved enough of it so you had the crop in the spring. Because what 18th century life was about was survival. And you had to survive on your own. I usually end my program with the following quotation from George M. Cohan, who was not an 18th century herb lady. My mother thanks you, my father thanks you, and my ancestors thank you. And I hope you have a grand old 4th of July. Thank you for sitting there. It's a little hot, I know, and I appreciate it. If you have any questions, just come up and ask me. If there's anything that you want to ask me about that, that's not a problem at all.
Chamomile, what was it used for again? Chamomile?
Nerves, and what they had was the German chamomile. The low, the very low. One of the things that you have to understand is in the churches, they exchange seeds, they exchange plants. That's how they got something. If the circuit riding minister came to Mary Foster's and he said 5 miles down the road was the next neighbor, I mean, that was typical. They were looking for something. These people just exchange things. I mean, there's this flow back and forth. And that's why there is actually a heritage seed exchange. I'm one of the members. And seeds are exchanged all over the United States and even in Europe to keep the seeds from their original, as I said, the Connecticut field pumpkin, which they can trace all the way back. And they do that. They do it every single year, and the thing of it is to keep alive the original seeds that were around. One of the things that I forgot to talk about is this is an herb lady. This is a lady that is a working class lady. We would call her a housewife. That's what they were called, a working class lady. And she would have a straw hat like this. You notice the brim is long, the crown is high, and she wouldn't have it decorated with ribbons or anything. She probably put tansy on it to keep the bugs away. But she would have been considered what we call a housewife, but they call her a working class lady. And that is why the clothing is what it is. It's not the clothing of Philadelphia and their finer clothing, because they had to make things last. One of the things that they did was, I have no pockets in my clothing. They had no pockets in their clothing. They wore them on the outside. The pockets got dirty. You didn't have to wash the whole petticoat. They called us a petticoat. We called it a skirt. You didn't have to wash the front. You just washed the pockets. And you could have pockets for different sizes. Ones when you went out to do your herb stuff, you could have bigger pockets. If you were going to church, you might embroider something on them. And that's what they did. They wore them on the outside. Everything had a purpose. Even this English bodice is reversible, so if I get dirty on this side, I can change to the other side. And there is no waist to this. Even though underneath this is a full dress. And then I put the other parts on. All it is a drawstring. So when they had their children, they expanded the drawstring, and when they were done, they could pull them in and wear them that way. And if you passed your clothing down, if the next person was thinner, you just tightened it up, and if they were heavier, you just expanded it. So it's two squares, basically, of material, and then the drawstring holds it. I do have on very fancy shoes. Yes, okay, yeah. These are reproduction, 18th century. Well, everything is. I have what she would wear on a Sunday. She would go out to her herb garden in these. But note that I have brass buckles. The brass buckles show my station in life. I am just a working class lady. I don't have silver or gold buckles. I just have the brass. But these would be her church shoes. And that's what she would wear them for. Any questions at all, I'll gladly answer them. And yes.
Willow bark has salicylic acid, which is aspirin.
Which is aspirin, but it has to be the native black willow. Yeah, that's the one. Yeah, but that's the one that they use for the native black willow. And that's why I think with the headache ring they made, and then they made that concoction to drink, yeah.
So that was aspirin, actually.
Yes, for the black willow, yeah. My theory is that if the cure didn't kill you, you were doing okay, because, I mean, some of the combinations, and especially that tansy. And I have tansy growing in my yard. In fact, I put it along the foundation of my parents' house. My mother always had an ant problem, and I have none. And the ants just don't like the tansy, but every time I look at it and I think of the fact that they ate it, it just totally fascinates me, you know. So
Are there local growers that have it? Where would you get it?
well, I lived in Lancaster County for 14 years, so when I sold my home down there, I dug some of my herbs up. I brought my tansy with me, but no, you can't find it. Last year I saw it even up at Walmart.
Can it?
Yes, it's called fern tansy. The one that you can't find is the button. The button tansy has a very lacy leaf that looks very much like a wild carrot. And that gets a yellow flower. The fern tansy looks just like a thick fern. That's what it looks like. And it's nice to mix it in with flowers because it's got that solid green. But most, I don't know if Porky's has it or not. I don't know. Just call. Tell them that, do you have tansy? You know, see. Yeah, you know, but it's amazing. I mean, they ate that and then used it for bug repel.
Sick.
Well, they already were sick. They had internal parasites because 18th century trying to keep food. I mean, there's no refrigerators, there's no nothing. And when you're getting to the point where your food's running out, I mean, you'll eat things that normally you wouldn't in your life.
Oh, they kept cooking.
Yeah, well, you know, it's eat or starve. That's exactly what it is.
They didn't can and that.
In the 18th century, they really weren't doing that much of that. There was limited amounts of that. They basically salted a lot of things. And if they were lucky enough to have a spring house where they could keep things, so they sort of did an awful lot of that. Their biggest problem was the lack of greens over the winter. Their diet basically stayed the same. So when spring came, they ate something that we wouldn't even think of, and that's garlic mustard, which we consider an intrusive weed. Garlic mustard is a weed, and it gets a green leaf, it comes up and has a yellow flower on it, and it's invading all of our woods in Pennsylvania and basically eliminating natural plants. And when you see it, pull it out. You can't miss it. It's the first green that you see. Oh, the snow isn't even gone, and it's showing it there. The woods that are behind me, most of the birds have disappeared because the garlic mustard has taken over. And I pull as best I can, but you know, it's just a losing battle. So, but they ate that. They ate many things that we wouldn't even think of. Because you have to have a green in your diet. You wouldn't go out and collect fiddleheads off the top of the ferns and fry them in lard. But they did that because they needed that green. They needed that in their diet. But somehow they survived because we're all here. Yes. And that's a harsh environment. You're in upstate New York. Eventually the Sherns family came to Pennsylvania. They came in 1802 into Susquehanna County. So eventually they moved, like most of them were always removing themselves from one place to the other. But it's still a harsh environment. Yeah, and a short growing season. So, you know, but like I said, she harvests 70% of her herbs because they were there. And that's not, but if you want to have an herb garden, I suggest that you do plant. Well, if you call and ask for bee balm, they won't know what you're talking about. If you call and ask for Monarda or bergamot, and by the way, Stash Tea is bringing back bergamot tea. They've had so many requests. They sold bergamot under the name Liberty Tea right up until the 1970s. And the last year that it was made by an English company, and I just think that's the funniest thing in the whole world, because here was this tea that we went through the American Revolution with, and the English company is making it, but they stopped making it. But now Stash is bringing it back, but they're calling it bergamot tea. They're not calling it by any fancy name. The thing about bergamot is that it will attract butterflies and hummingbirds, and it's a lot easier to take care of than a butterfly bush and a lot of the other plants. If you want a hummingbird garden or you want a butterfly garden, definitely plant that.
Is that like a purple flower on it?
Well, yeah, bergamot, it comes up and it has a flower and it's very spiky.
Yeah.
Okay, that's what you get. It's a real wild flower, which is almost impossible. If I knew where there was any, I would never tell anybody because people keep just, if you pull it out, it is not going to propagate to next year. That's the problem. It needs to dry, seed, and drop down. So the thing of it is that would be what I call Christmas red. You just don't see it. There were pockets of it yet in Susquehanna County when I was probably about 13, 14 years old. And I'm 62, so you know how long ago that was. And it's not there anymore. So it's just that. But if you want to put a really inexpensive butterfly or hummingbird garden, plant it. I guarantee you, hummingbirds will come. They just come.
Where would I get this bird?
Anywhere where they sell herbs. The tea itself, I've been asking everywhere that they sell Stash tea to get it in. So I have requests all over the place. You can go on the internet and buy it on the Stash site, but you know you're paying shipping and all that. So yeah, you can go on there and you can get it. All you got to do is ask them for their catalog. Because if they send you a catalog, they send you a coupon that's either $5 or $6 off because you're a first-time customer, and then you can get it. But it's really good. It's really an excellent thing. So, and I thank you for all listening so attentively.
Yes,
You're
you're
more
very
than welcome. You're more than welcome. And I even took my allergy medicine so I'd have some kind of voice tonight.
Yes, yes. Can't find it in Wegmans. Never find it. Wegmans usually has lots of shipping stuff.
Price Chopper sells the best selection of stash tea. Every now and then, Redners sell it. I'm trying to think of what else. I think the last time I just sent for it because I sent for the catalog and then I got the coupon and I thought, oh, I can do this. And so I sent for the pack, even though I'm trying leaves all over the place to make it myself. And you should never really steep fresh herbs with boiling water because they'll just go to mush and you're not going to get tea. You're just not. You're going to get this soft, gooey mess. You really need to dry the herbs. But at this point in time in my life, it's a lot easier to get the herbs as a tea in a box. So, yeah, but it's a very, very good tea. Oh, it's delicious. If you like a tea that is light and still has a fragrance, but it is not a bitter tea, it's more on the sweet side, and it's very, very, very tasty. Yeah, it's a good tea. Supposedly in the herb lore, it has a lot of health things, but teas have that mystical quality. People have believed things about teas for a long time. Yeah, that's a big craze, and right now the white.
White tea?
Yeah, the white tea. Celestial Seasoning has a white, I think it's white pear.
One of them's in lemon.
I'm not a big drinker of lemon at all
I
in
love
tea,
lemon.
but the white pear tea is really supposed to be very healthy, and that you can get at Walmart. That's another place to check. Every now and then you walk over in that one section.
To the TJ Maxx has a lot of different kinds of food. They might have some.
Yeah.
Still offer different stuff.
Well, lots of my bergamot is planted out there because it's easy for me to get my hummingbirds that way. And I don't have to bother with the butterfly bush, and I don't have to do a lot of things because basically with bergamot, every time I'm collecting it, I'm cutting it down, so it makes it rather easy. I can hardly wait for it to flower because I have hummingbirds right now, but I'll have a lot more. Hummingbird war stars. Makes
Our
for
neighbor had planted like a little purple flower.
yeah, that's what you wind up. Even if the tag says it's gonna turn red, it won't. I even wrote to the one company and said, it ain't red.
Didn't watch the hummingbird. They used to sit in the chair with them and watch the hummingbird.
See, we only have one species of hummingbird in this part of the country, so you can be a hummingbird expert. It's a ruby throat.
And you're not supposed to, that sweet stuff that they put out for hummingbirds, they don't survive. Because they migrate, they don't survive.
Yeah, and the other thing is, they've done research on that showed that there was a liver problem because of some of that. Yeah, and you don't even need the red coloring. You really don't. You don't.
And they shouldn't do
I put a sugar mixture out, like, I guess like I want to say beginning of April, when I realized there's an actual website. It's called hummingbird.net, and you go on and you can track the hummingbirds.
Yeah, but they tell you not to use that sugar stuff.
Well,
To feed.
they promote that you're making a watered down. It's 6 parts water, 1 part sugar for when the hummingbirds are coming through. And not in the fall, but when they're coming through now, and they really need the energy. They do promote that. The problem is what's killing the hummingbirds is people don't clean their hummingbird feeders. You have a temperature change, you have got something growing in that feeder, and you better clean it, and people don't do that. I've seen hummingbird feeders that were like almost black because they were so full of mildew. But they do use that. What they're against is those packages that are pre-made. It's supposed to have the fructose, they're supposed to have sugar, they're supposed to have the coloring in them, there's a picture of the hummingbird, think it's Perky Pet is the name, and that's what they're really against because that is killing some of the hummingbirds. It really is. And you shouldn't keep the hummingbird feeder out for them. When you get to fall and the weather starts to change, take it in, make that bird move. That's the other problem. They're not moving like they used to. Yeah, they
Can I
stay
interrupt you for a
chum.
minute here? We'll get back to this.
Comment on the Menards, if you ask for the cultivars, either Adam Red or Cambridge product, you will get a true red. We sold it for years.
You know, look to that now, miss, that,
Where?
We had only a year farm.
Oh,
And we sold it for 25 years, and you can't get reds, true reds. If you've got either.
I've been up there
I know.
many times, and the thing that really turned me on was that, I'm not going to say this right, it was like a moon garden. Yeah, at night I have certain plants.
Oh, okay. They look,
Yeah, and that was this, yeah.
But if you ask for those for cultivars, you will get true red. There are true reds available. And they are, the Cambridge product is actually is darker than the Adam Red.
The only one I ever got that it said it was going to be red, it still wasn't red like the wild bee balm is.
These cultivars
But
are.
it wasn't bought in the kind of place that you had. Are you open again? Because I heard
No, we're retired.
if someone, I did a program for the Lackawanna Historical Society, and I did a program for the Lackawanna Historical Society, and someone asked me, and I said, you know, I don't know. I haven't been up there, and they said, somebody stood up and said, no, I think that they retired.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
That one of them.
It's, yeah, it has to be because I was up, yeah, the last time. And is there anything equivalent to what you had? I always think of the slumber bears. Don't ask me why. I mean, that's terrible, isn't it? But I bought a bunch of those, and I might have got my chocolate mint up there. I don't know where I got my chocolate mint. And but I always think of the slumber bears. I shipped them things all over the place to people. Yeah, they were really pleasure. But I don't know where else to
anytime I
go
pack popcorn out
locally
there,
that
wait
would
for
be the
record
equivalent.
dark centers,
There is no place.
That's what's under there.
Not really.
Harry Frederick and
See, the problem is people go for the price. And I see people buying herbs at Walmart, and, first of all, half the stuff looks 3/4 dead to begin with.
So what's
And
happening now?
what they're buying is just, it's like, that plant ain't gonna make it. They're just not healthy enough.
Yep.
They're not,
And our prices were comparable and even better than theirs were sometimes.
Well, see, I lived in Lancaster County, so I thought you were really dirt cheap. So when I went up there, I loaded my Voyager. Yeah, see, Lancaster County, I lived 14 years in Lancaster County, and the prices down there are twice of anything that's up here. Yeah.
Now down there, the Amish are going there to make some
Yeah.
because they're losing their income.
Well, they have that problem with the tobacco. The other thing is the encroachment on the farms where we lived. Basically, Reevestown was all Amish and Mennonite farms. I had bluebird boxes on the property. And one by one, those farms disappeared. But if you're wreaking out this horrible living, and I'm a developer and I offer you $5 million, the fact that your family's been there for 125 years, that just seems to go out of your head because you can relocate, you can buy a bigger property, and you don't have the problems. And that's what happens. They put the housing developments in and they call it Quail Hollow. And there had been a quail there, God knows when, or even a wildflower name they would use, Bloodroot. And they sold the houses for $2,000, $3,000, $100,000, and there's no bloodroot there. There's nothing but blacktop and grass with lots of stuff on it to kill those dandelions. So, that Lancaster County is in the upheaval down there. It's sad. It's really sad. They're losing the quality of their life, and I feel sorry for the Amish and the Old Order Mennonites because they should be allowed to live the way they want to, and they can't because it's just encroaching all over the place. Well, the worst offender is Walmart. Walmart put a store down there that wiped out 4 of the best farms for produce that I could go and buy at in the years that I was down there, because they put out a hardware store that probably was there when the Indians were here. And it was so sad. It was,
That's why I went to Walmart.
Yeah.
I went to Walmart.
yeah. And my problem with the whole thing is okay, you leave this store here because you want to build a superstore over here. You've already destroyed this habitat. Now you're going to go pave this stuff. You know? So it's just, it's terrible. We don't save our natural areas. We're going to be in trouble. Big time trouble.
It all starts in farm, farm.
We won't have any food because you know what? Unlike the 18th century people that knew how to do stuff. I mean, I have friends that don't know how to make soup from scratch. They go, you don't buy soup starter? What do you mean you're buying a ham bone? What are you going to do? You can't give that to your dog. I said, no, I'm going to make ham and bean soup. And they just look at me like, you know? Yeah,
You
yeah.
said they're even saving certain products.
You're right.
Go to the store and buy hard-boiled eggs.
Yes. 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 With the
But
red
at Easter time, you got
color. Yes. Yes. Yeah, but that's the truth of the matter, and I think we're gonna pay a price for it. I really do.
Yeah.
We are gonna pay a price, you know? And if we don't pay it, we're supposed to be the stewards of the land. Our next generation behind us is gonna pay. Someone's gonna pay the price because you can't keep destroying everything. And, you know, I mean, I lived down, I kept my parents' property down on Kaiser Avenue. And that landfill down there is higher than that mountain ever was. Now you go up Snake Road and you can't see because the landfill is there. And what goes to that landfill? All the garbage out of New York. Truck after truck after truck. But they promised they'd paint the streets with gold and the people said, oh, bring it. Now they're stuck with it. Yeah, it's a no-win situation. I don't know what you're gonna do. I really don't.
Northeastern, I asked him last night. They
You
were
always
looking
send up,
I didn't
going
know.
over to bars, and
Debbie
you say,
and
oh, there used to be
Eleanor,
water
they're
here.
all, I just let it sit for the
Millions of years, you're gonna send
what it was.
over to Earth and say, it used to be water.
There used to be habitation here.
They make it,
We're talking about a meteorite,